Hi, everyone. This is Mookie Alexander, managing editor at Field Goals. Hope you had a good festive Christmas period and that it continues for New Year's. Now, it's been a little while since we did a video mailbag. I did it in written form the last time, I believe sometime around Thanksgiving. So before the Seahawks take on the Steelers for New Year's Eve, might as well answer some questions from the Field Goals community about the team. Now, I don't want to waste too much time, so let's get rolling with the first question. These are all from our comment section, which you should join if you haven't already. So question one of two, I might add, comes from Night Train. If the Seahawks make the playoffs and they lose their first game, do John Schneider and Pete Carroll return? Why or why not? I see no reason to believe that either Carroll or Schneider's jobs are under threat. If they miss the playoffs, that would be very, very disappointing. And I'm sure that a lot of the fans would want to move on from at least Carroll, whether Carroll or Schneider both, but definitely Carroll. One playoff win over 7 seasons is what Seattle is staring at. But if they make the playoffs and lose to, say, the Cowboys or the 49ers or the Lions in a rematch or the Eagles, I mean, those teams, at least most of them to me, are just better than Seattle. And if in year two of the post-Russell Wilson era, the Seahawks are indeed not better than the Dallas Cowboys or San Francisco 49ers or established contenders, and then you have Detroit that just burst onto the scene here, that shouldn't shock anybody. We have to take the homer glasses off a little bit and realize where Seattle is in terms of the pecking order as far as contenders, playoff caliber teams, and Super Bowl contenders. Seattle, I think, in general, when we contextualize the whole season, fringe playoff team, just about playoff caliber. Are they a Super Bowl contender? Absolutely not. Way too many things would have to go perfectly into place for Seattle to be a serious contender. But no reason to think that Carroll or Schneider's jobs are in jeopardy. Carroll, if he leaves on his own volition, if he retires, that's one thing. But in terms of him getting fired, I don't think this season in particular is grounds for firing. If he gets fired, it would have to be for some non-football reason, I believe. So there's not going to be any changes in terms of the coach and the general manager, I believe, regardless of how the season ends. That includes if they just collapse and miss the playoffs. That's my opinion. It doesn't mean I want Carroll and Schneider to still be around 5-6 years from now. It's just the reality of it is they just signed contract extensions. Neither one of them is really going away. Now, the other question, if the Hawks make the playoffs, what does Geno need to do in terms of wins to retain him as quarterback for 2024? Is there anything he can do to stay as the franchise quarterback? That's a bit of a loaded question because in terms of wins, he can have a great performance in a losing effort. It's not the first time that's happened to a Seahawks quarterback, right? I mean, it just happened with Russell Wilson his very first year in Seattle, where he had the amazing comeback against the Falcons, and then the defense blew a 1-point lead in about a half minute. It was one of the best performances I'd ever seen in a losing effort from a quarterback. So for Geno, I think he just has to look the parts of a playoff-ready quarterback. I don't even think he played poorly in the 49ers game last year, but then the fumble happened and everything unraveled. And it turns out he would have basically had to have been Patrick Mahomes of MVP, MVP Patrick Mahomes in order to keep up with the 49ers because the defense was just that incompetent. So you look at the options for Seattle if they make the playoffs. There are only 4 teams they can play in the postseason, in the wild card round, that is. San Francisco, Philadelphia, Detroit, Dallas. Dallas, known for defense, and they got a high-powered offense, at least at home they do. And we already saw with the way that game in Dallas went a few weeks back. San Francisco, going to leave them aside because unless Trent Williams has some sort of season-ending injury, the Seahawks just have nothing for San Francisco. There's just a massive talent and coaching mismatch there that's I don't think Geno's going to be able to overcome by himself. Philadelphia is interesting because even if that's on the road, the Eagles are hardly an invincible team at home, and they have been walking a tightrope really in a lot of their winning performances, let alone the 3-game losing streak that they just had. I think that Seattle can match up well with Philadelphia the way that the Eagles look. And then the Lions, I believe, even though Seattle beat them in week 2 with backup tackles starting, that Detroit is a better team, or at least a better offense now than they were in week 2. And certainly the Seahawks defense didn't play particularly well in the first meeting, other than the Trey Brown pick 6 and a couple of good plays from Devin Witherspoon. I think turnovers really masked that Seattle looked overwhelmed, and I suspect they will look overwhelmed in a playoff environment, and especially in a place that hasn't experienced playoff football in 30 years at that in that city. So for Geno, it's a wait and see. If he plays well and they lose, I don't think that should be on Geno. If he plays poorly and he's a major reason the team loses, then some things have to be examined, I suspect. But we'll probably have some more thoughts on Geno in the other questions to come. We will move on to the next question from Ollie Rob. Are both the offense and defense less than the sum of their parts, or have I, in my homerism, drastically overestimated the talent, or have injuries made this impossible to determine? All right, so this is a kind of a two-parter. I think, yes, they've been less than the sum of their parts, but for different reasons. On the offensive side of the ball, I do believe injuries have had a major factor in the offensive struggles, and that isn't just Geno missing a couple of games. It's the offensive line just being a revolving door. When you lose Cross for several weeks, when you lose Lucas for much of the season, when you lose Damian Lewis for a couple of games, you lose Phil Haynes, he's on IR, and Anthony Bradford has had his ups and downs. I think he's better at run blocking than he is in pass protection at this point. Even Evan Brown's been banged up, so they've had to do a lot of shuffling such that they had to sign Jason Peters in the first place. Now Jason Peters isn't an option for the next couple of weeks because he's injured. So the offensive line having no continuity, not a lot of experience even among the normal starting group. I feel like because Seattle's offensive line looks better than expected last year, there was the belief that they could really make that major leap this year. And the Cross and Lucas injuries kind of made that impossible. So for the Seahawks offensive line to not be able to function consistently, such that they've been rotating guys in and out of the lineup for weeks on end, it creates some difficulties for the run blocking, the pass protection, and it shortens the playbook a bit because you can't necessarily call plays with iffy pass protection if you don't trust that the pass pro can hold up. So the offense having the injuries on the offensive line, I think, has made a major negative impact on the way that they've performed. And also, I do believe that beyond just Geno not being as good as he was last season, and the offensive line woes have been a major issue, the play calling definitely has not helped. We're only now seeing Seattle play a little bit better on third down and trying to get the ball out more quickly, fewer long developing routes. I'm a little bit confused as to the drop off in play action rates from Waldron over the past few weeks. That's not necessarily a bad thing, and some of it is game state based, of the fact that they've had to do some must pass situations, and that's going to lower the percentage a bit. But yes, the offense I don't think has performed to its potential, but it's not too late for them because the offensive line, the starting unit at least, is as healthy as it's been all season. We are seeing them improve a bit on third down based on the last 4 games, which I wrote in the article that's up on Field Goals right now. They're seventh in third down conversion over the last 4 games, and they hadn't had a stretch like that in any other 4 games span throughout the season. The run blocking just got to be better, and that was a problem last year too. So I don't think I'm not going to argue that if they were healthy all the way that the run blocking would be better. I believe that that's going to be something that Carroll is going to address in the offseason, that the run blocking just has to improve in order for Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet to not have to fight for so many hard yards, because Walker gets a bit of a bad rap. It's a warranted bad rap based on the stats, but a bad rap in terms of having to bounce everything. But part of that is there's not a lot of holes for him to just take off and run through them. The same applies for Zach Charbonnet. And it's really apparent in the red zone, where they're the only team in the NFL that is not averaging even a yard per carry inside the 10. In goal-to-go situations, they're averaging under a yard per carry. Zach Charbonnet's got 13 carries for no yards. Charbonnet is not a bad running back. Kenneth Walker's not a bad running back. They're both quite good, if you ask me. But the blocking isn't holding up, and they're just getting manhandled too often. So that's, to me, where the offense is lesser than the sum of its parts. On the defensive side of the ball, I think they're less than the sum of their parts, but they haven't been as injured, at least comparatively speaking to the offense. They're not losing guys for the season outside of Uchenna Nwosu. And then Jamal Adams right now, he's missed quite a bit of the season, but I don't think anybody's particularly up in arms over him not playing right now. But still, the way I see it is the Seahawks offense had the potential to be top 5, top 10, and they're not meeting that. The Seahawks defense, I don't think ever really had potential this year to be an elite group. I was hoping that they would at least be league average or a little bit above that, and that they had that sort of ability to improve upon a pretty bad last season. the fact that they ended up being worse or on pace to be worse, that's the disheartening part. And I feel to me, I think there has been some regression. Kobe Bryant is almost not playable at the moment with the way that he's performed in his few defensive snaps. And then Reek Woolen has had issues with penalties and tackling and just general coverage bust that got him benched briefly for Mike Jackson. But I do like the fact that Pete Carroll was willing to mix things up by benching Woolen in the first place and giving Mike Jackson some snaps, because Jackson has shown that he's a capable starting corner. The preseason, he didn't have a great preseason. He lost his starting job to Trey Brown. But in the limited time that he's played, he's looked just like he did last year, which is a good thing. So mixing some coverages up, mixing the snaps in the secondary, I think is important. The defensive backs, that is, Woolen, Witherspoon, Trey Brown, Mike Jackson, Artie Burns, I think that's a really good group. But Seattle's weaknesses, to me, are unfortunately game-damaging bad. This version of Adams, who can't get after the quarterback consistently, these are wasted blitzes. And then at the linebacker spot, you got a hobble Jordan Brooks. And then Bobby Wagner can still do some good things. I mean, he can still rush the quarterback well. He can still make tackles. But in terms of his athleticism, his agility, better offenses, i.e., San Francisco and the Los Angeles Rams, exploiting him way too often in pass coverage. And even against the run, which I think he's been better against the run than against the pass, he's been getting washed out of plays pretty frequently. And it's hard to watch. You could tell that there are still some vintage Bobby moments, but there are other times, and we're seeing it on a pretty frequent basis, I'm afraid, where he is just not a positive factor in the play. So we're at a point where Seattle's weaknesses on defense are just absolutely ripping the whole structure apart, such that the strengths of the team don't matter as much. The fact that Devin Witherspoon is playing at a rookie of the year level doesn't matter as much when teams are just exploiting other outsized problems like the middle of the field and the linebacker play, where I think Brooks has been fine this year, but even he's not been playing at an all-pro level or anything. We shouldn't expect it off of an ACL tear. And then some of the safety play. And as much as Julian Love has just balled out these last couple of weeks, he's had his issues too, especially at the start of the season. Quandre Diggs, I still think, is playing well, and people are just too harsh on him because of the missed tackles, which are a problem. Don't let me not get it twisted. The missed tackles are an issue, but they are not getting beaten like 40, 50 yards over the top because of Diggs. It's just that Seattle's having too many bust-ups in front of him, where Diggs is being the last line of defense too often. And to me, when Diggs is not on the screen and they're not throwing his way, that's a good thing. And he has played better the last couple of weeks. We've seen him more downhill. So hopefully there is some sort of potential for a defensive turnaround these last couple of weeks, but I'm not banking on it. I just think this is not a good unit. And we're going to get into that a little bit more in terms of the coaching and schematic stuff and so on and so forth. All right, let's get to the next question. Masada 714, with all of the upcoming changes to mainly defense, does Clint get another chance, or will we be looking for another DC? Same with Shane. With Waldron, I think he's won me over the last few weeks with some of the third down plays and the way that they're using Jackson Smith and Jigba. The passing game looks a little bit more fluid. The running game, though, continuing to be a problem. That may put him in the crosshairs a bit. It just feels like Waldron's doesn't have a great feel for play calling in terms of sequencing and all that stuff and tendency breaking. That's not to say he's not creative. He is quite creative. They use motion at a high rate. You see all the stuff he does with the 12 and 13 personnel. That's not a boring, bland offense. It's just the way that the plays are called and the organization of it. Sometimes you'll just go weeks, not weeks, but you just go plays where you're going, what is the plan here? Why are they always passing on 3rd down and 2? Or where did the play action go? Why are we doing straight drop back? Why are we doing a swing pass out to Kenneth Walker in the shadow of our own goal line? That's why I think is Waldron's main failing. But he's probably avoiding the proverbial chopping block. I think the same applies to Clint. To me, it does not matter who the defensive coordinator is. It's a little different with the offensive coordinator because Pete has always hired from the outside in the offensive coordinator spot. Jeremy Bates, Darrell Bevel, Brian Schottenheimer, and now we get to Shane Waldron. Defensive coordinator is just carrying out Pete's defense. He inherited Gus Bradley from the Jim Mora staff. He inherited Dan Quinn, and then Quinn left to go coach at Florida. And then he ended up getting hired for the 2013 season. So that is, to me, basically a roundabout way of saying he is a hire from within. And then after Quinn left, you have Chris Richard, in-house promotion. You have Ken Norton, brought back after he was fired by the Raiders as defensive coordinator, basically familiarity, in-house-ish promotion. And then after Norton gets fired, he gets a Clint Hurtt, who is a direct in-house promotion. They all do the same thing, which is run Pete's defense. So I feel like Hurt's job, even though he's produced the worst results of any of the defensive coordinators, I don't think that Seattle's going to move on from him. But I could be wrong on that front. To me, the defensive side of the ball is absolutely on Pete's fingerprints. There may be a little leeway as to what the defensive coordinator wants to do schematically and with play calling and all that stuff, but there is a clear difference to me in the way that Pete views coaching the defense versus coaching the offense. So again, there could be some sweeping changes at both coordinator spots if all goes wrong. I mean, it's not like Carroll has been averse to making some changes before. The fact that he fired Norton after 7-10 season, when it feels like the 2020 season was much more of a fireable offense. Firing Schottenheimer to begin with after the Let Russ Cook campaign fell apart. And then, of course, 2017, 9-7, they just narrowly missed the playoffs. And then he says goodbye to Tom Cable, goodbye to Bevel, and goodbye to Richard. So the bottom doesn't have to fall out completely for Carroll to say something's not working here. I'm going to change some stuff. All right, now let's move on to Wyatt's 3. Has the defense reverted to a 4-3, 4-2-5? And if so, has it been more effective? And 2, have the Seahawks misused Draymond Jones? So Griff, see Mike Spin Move on Twitter, knows more about it than me, but he had written something a couple weeks ago saying, random reminder, the Seahawks aren't an odd space 3-4 team anymore. Structure-wise, they're the Chris Richard Seahawks up front. The 3-4 Hawks era from 2020 to 2021 and parts of 2022 are dead. So I've just been playing around with Sports Info Solutions. And it doesn't take much if you just piecemeal it through the snap counts. Seattle is basically a nickel-based defense. They've run more nickel this year than they have the whole of last year, and definitely a lot more than they did in 2020 and 2021. And I remember in 2019, which is before the whole 3-4 switch, 2019, they could not get out of base defense. They couldn't get out of their 4-3. And the reason for that is they just had a hard time finding a nickel corner. They started with Jamar Taylor, and he was not good. And they got rid of him. They promoted Ugo Amadi, but that's a rookie Ugo Amadi. And he's, he's had his ups and downs in Seattle. He's now with the New Orleans Saints, and I don't really think he has the athletic profile to be a consistent high-level starting nickel corner, which is why they drafted Devin Witherspoon. There is this big shift in the NFL. The game is more spread out. You got more receivers on the field, more 11 personnel. That's you pretty much have to run a lot of nickel, running 5 defensive backs or 6 defensive backs if you want to get into dime. So the Seahawks aren't really doing that 3-4 stuff anymore. They are running more nickel fronts with the 4-2-5 look, essentially. And it's not really been brought up much. And the 3-4 thing at this point is just you're chasing shadows. It's stuff that doesn't exist anymore. Has it been effective? Well, the results haven't been great in terms of the overall product. So I don't think it's necessarily just a formation thing as it is there. Some of it is just poor player execution. Other bits, I think the opposition, or at least the better offensive minds, know how to attack Seattle's weaknesses, and they've known it for a good while, no matter what scheme they run, whether it's a 3-4 or a 4-3 or a 4-2-5. Now, the Draymond Jones stuff, this is interesting because he had the big sack to essentially ice the game against the Titans on Sunday. And you might have noticed if you watch the replay that he was lined up on the edge. So there's been a big change since the Leonard Williams trade, where Jones was pretty much playing in the interior as a defensive tackle. But if you look at his snap count, and I'm looking at my other monitor here, since the Leonard Williams trade, the number of snaps he's taken on the edge, outside the tackle, have completely flipped compared to before Leonard Williams got there. So you look at the first 9 games of the season, and he's primarily lined up in the B gap, which is between the tackle and guard. He's lined up outside the majority of the time, overwhelming majority of the time, in fact, ever since week, let's say 10, which is the Commanders game. So, yes, I think initially they misused Draymond Jones. He seems to be playing better. And for whatever value you have with PFF grading, he's grading better ever since the move to the outside to effectively be as an edge guy. So, yes, Draymond Jones, slow start. And I still think that he's a bit of a liability in run defense. But in terms of his pass rushing ability, it seems like moving him to the edge has worked wonders for Seattle because they get the best of both worlds. They can keep Leonard Williams on the inside where he's just been beastly. And to make up for the lack of production from Darrell Taylor and Derek Hall and Frank Clark, you just move Jones out to the edge in Nwosu's absence, and you've got Jones and Mafe as kind of your primary guys on the edges. So very, very good questions, why at 3. We move to Tyler Jorgensen. What's up, Tyler? Speaking of Leonard Williams, do you think we re-sign Leonard Williams? And if we do, will it be to terms we don't regret? I know he said regard, but he meant regret down the road. And in hindsight, will this prove to be yet another shitty win now, pay later move, ultimately setting us back in our quest towards another Super Bowl, like so many of other moves, both in trade and free agency, to acquire veteran talent in the last half decade plus? I hope they re-sign Leonard Williams because I like Big Cat. I would be annoyed if they didn't re-sign him because it would have wasted a second-round pick for a handful of games. Now, the use of the second-round pick, that's for another discussion. Like, it feels like in an alternate universe, if they had more cap space, they could have just taken Williams' salary and not have to give up a second-round pick. And I think the trade would have been viewed a lot differently compared to giving up pretty high draft capital at a time when a lot of Seahawks fans believe that this team is not only a good ways away from being a contender, but that second round pick could easily be used on a quarterback. So you look at the market right now, and among interior defensive linemen, just on average money per year, Leonard Williams is at the end of his 3-year, $63 million deal. And that puts him at $21 million a year. The only players who are making more than him on average are, no shit, Aaron Donald and Quinnen Williams, the top two. Jeffrey Simmons, Dexter Lawrence, his former Giants teammate, and then Deron Payne is at $22.5 million a year, and then DeForest Buckner is tied with Williams in terms of money per year at 21 mil, and then Javon Hargrave, who I wanted Seattle to sign, but he ended up going to San Francisco. He's also on $21 million a year. So what does a contract extension look like for him? I haven't the foggiest idea. I hope that it's not a market-setting contract because he is about to hit 30 very soon. But for the Seahawks, this feels to be like the Sheldon Richardson thing all over again, where I don't think Richardson was as good as Leonard Williams, but they traded for Richardson out of desperation, essentially because of the Malik McDowell debacle. And they ended up not re-signing him. And he's just ended up like hopping around from team to team, year to year, and now he's out of the league. We saw the trade they made for Clowney because, again, they traded Frank Clark away. And then 3 weeks before the regular season starts, to go, holy shit, we don't have any pass rush at all. So they trade for Clowney, a lot less draft capital given up. Out there for 1 year, contract year. He's had some good moments, had some moments where he was invisible, and then had a moment against the 49ers where he turned into the best player in the league all of a sudden. And now his career is actually being revived in Baltimore, which is funny to me because I think he's going to have his first double-digit sack season ever. But for Leonard Williams, this might be a little bit different. I suspect that Pete Carroll wasn't BSing when he said that they've been looking at getting Leonard for a good while. I still think he's valuable. I just hope they don't overpay. But they don't want to just keep recycling the defensive line because they already just hit the reset button on this defensive line. So you keep Williams on the interior, you keep Jaron Reed for 1 more year, keeping in mind that Mike Morris should be coming back from injury next season. And I think he could be an intriguing addition to the interior rotation. But yes, I expect that they're going to keep Leonard Williams around. And if they don't, then what was the point of this trade? He's not been the problem. It's just that as we've seen very often, Seattle makes moves as if they're that one player away. And very often the reality hits that, no, they're not one player away from the defense being fixed or the offensive line being fixed. We end up seeing a bunch of other problems that may not have anything to do with the player in question, but it shows you that they are not necessarily the big solution. I got to go back to the question again. Will this be a win now, pay later move? Well, my thing would be if you let him walk and you build through the draft, we're on the assumption that they could get somebody. Yeah, you can get somebody as good as Leonard Williams for much cheaper, but if they don't, then you're ruining the whole, man, we could have kept Leonard Williams and still had a much more competent defensive line than we have right now. So I think what sets Seattle back in their quest towards another Super Bowl are the contracts that they've handed out to the big trades like the Jamal Adams trade, or when they make these patchwork moves like signing Ziggy Ansah for way too much money for pretty much no productivity whatsoever. I think Williams is a bit different. Doesn't mean I'm a fan of the trade, but I am a fan of the player, and I do believe that Seattle is going to make an effort. Doesn't mean they are definitely going to re-sign him and that he's a lock. There's going to be a market for him. But ideally, it's like a 2-year deal, and it's got a lot of outs to it. Certainly a better contract than the one that Uncle Will Dissly got to tight end, where he's suddenly one of the highest paid tight ends in the league, and he's basically the third best tight end on the roster right now. So those types of contracts have irked me a lot more. But with Leonard Williams, we'll wait and see on that one. So let's move on to Hawk. Can the NFL possibly be happy with all the changes that have led to primetime games as lackluster as the lackluster as the Jets versus the Browns? The vast majority of the teams in the league are mediocre and uninteresting. And given the obvious failure of live sports to stop cord cutting, does the NFL need to do something to improve the on-field product before the next broadcast contract negotiations? Well, the broadcast, the current media rights, they're already set in stone. It's going to be years before they start negotiating again. So starting in a couple of years, I think ABC is going to be back in the Super Bowl rotation. As far as the primetime games, some of it is just bad luck. I mean, look at how many quarterbacks are getting hurt this year, including quarterbacks like Kirk Cousins, who've never been hurt ever. They've never missed games unless they're benched for reasons that amount to, we have nothing to play for, don't want to risk injury. So Cousins gets hurt. Aaron Rodgers, who's, of course, 39 years old or 40 years old or whatever, he gets hurt 3 snaps into the season. And those are 2 quarterbacks right there that are on teams that got quite a few primetime games. And then you just go, the list goes on and on. Justin Herbert gets hurt and he misses the season or the last few weeks of the season. I think for the NFL, they're not too worried about the primetime games not being any good because the ratings have been good. Ratings have been just fine. Monday Night Football is having one of its best years ever. Sunday Night Football, I'm not too privy on, but Thursday Night Football ended up having a greater rating set, and at least they can quantify that with the streaming on Prime Video, and maybe even adding a bit more for those who know that you can actually watch Thursday Night Football on Twitch. So the ratings have been just fine, even with all the bad football we've seen and some of the bad quarterback play. The truth of the matter is, in this current environment, the reason why NFL Red Zone is so popular is because you can cut through all the bad football and just hop to all the good stuff. If you were just stuck with a certain game, if you had Sunday Ticket and you were just hopping to one game to another game and going quarter at a time, there is a lot of bad football, but Red Zone kind of just cuts through that by just showing you all the exciting stuff. There are just a lot of national TV games. The increase in the media rights costs means that more networks are getting more primetime games, which means we're seeing a lot more bad, mediocre teams, even if they have healthy quarterbacks, on the national stage, the island game, so to speak, where there's nothing unopposed. In fact, next year, it looks like Monday Night Football may lean into more doubleheaders, which I just don't like that. It wasn't too long ago where it was just a handful of Thursday Night Football games, Sunday Night Football for the whole season, Monday Night Football for the whole season, and then your traditional Thanksgiving games and whatever else. Now we've got games on Christmas Day. We got games on Black Friday. We've got an additional Thanksgiving game as opposed to just the Cowboys and Lions every year. We've got Monday Night Football doubleheaders. We've got a game on Peacock. So we're seeing these teams more often. I don't think the football has not necessarily gotten better or worse. It's just we're seeing more of it. And the more you have primetime games, those standalone games, the more likely you're going to get some absolute clunkers. That's just the nature of the beast. So I don't think the NFL is concerned about the product, even though they should be with the way that we've seen some of these teams, just like the Jets, be completely unwatchable. But yes, the only solution it feels like is be more discerning as far as their primetime selection, or maybe change the whole flex scheduling system, that there are certain games where, or certain time slots, I should say, like the late season Thursday night games, the late season Monday night games, late season Sunday night games, where you go, to be determined. Here's a set of games where this time slot is not set in stone. These games could be flexed out a month or 2 months out in advance. That way you can mitigate somewhat having the Bears and the Jets and other teams well out of playoff contention taking up primetime slots when they shouldn't be on primetime at all. So let's move on to the last couple of questions. Eberg Hawk fan says, prequel to my draft question, will any of Bobby Wagner, Quandre Diggs, Jamal Adams, Geno Smith, or Drew Lock be Seahawks next year? And I think he had another question. Yes. What's our biggest draft need? Quarterback, linebacker, safety, or other? So I'll start with the biggest draft need, quarterback and linebacker and safety. Safety, I feel like, is a need, especially with the expectation that they're going to move on from Adams. I'm hoping they move on from Jamal Adams. I don't think his tenure in terms of his performance has been as bad as those last couple of games before he ended up missing out with injury. Like these last couple of games with the Cowboys yikes moments, and then the 49ers where we got beat over the top by Deebo Samuel. That hasn't been him every single week for however many games that he's played in Seattle. But in terms of the trade value, it's just been a massive bust. And it's the type of trade where if Seattle was actually a terrible team and they were winning 3-4 games with him, I would say that would be the one where you could argue for firing Carroll and Schneider. But that aside, yes, they do need better safety play, especially with Carroll's defenses. It seems like they really do live and die off of safety play. Because think about the Tedrick Thompson experience before they traded for Quandre Diggs for a 5th-round pick at that. Defense started to look a little bit better, in fact, a lot better, as soon as they said, Tedrick, you go on IR, we're going to get Quandre Diggs. Of course, the Leno Hill experience went poorly. And then even before that, I think of when Earl Thomas broke his leg, you put Steven Terrell in, and every other game, they were just getting absolutely shredded with Terrell out there at safety. So, yeah, safety, I think, is going to be a big need for Seattle, and ditto for linebacker, because I don't expect Wagner to have another season with the Seahawks. And if he does have another season, I hope he's not getting 100% snap counts every single week. They're going to have to rotate their linebackers better. And the middle linebacker position for Seattle, the inside linebacker position, has just been oddly handled with some of their picks. Cody Barton obviously has been a divisive figure among Seahawks fans. I know some of our film guys, Maddie and Griff in particular, are higher on Barton than the fans are, but I lean towards the side of he's okay at his absolute best, and then unplayable at his absolute worst. He's not on the team anymore. Kevin Pierre-Louis couldn't really play him much. You had Brock Coyle, you had Michael Wilhoit. You've had some weird draft picks and some bad one-year signings, and they have almost no linebacker depth right now. If Jordan Brooks can't go against the Steelers, you are left with Devin Bush and Bobby Wagner as your 2 off-ball linebackers. And then who's your next man up? Somebody from the practice squad like Patrick O'Connell. You're going to play John Radigan, who almost never plays any defensive snaps. I think this is an issue they need to address. And I think the big argument for me is, I'm going to go off on a tangent here. You watch the 49ers get absolutely stalled out by the Baltimore Ravens. And then you look at a couple of their other losses this season to Cleveland and to Cincinnati, and then got the Minnesota game. Beyond the fact that almost all those defenses are pretty good, Cincinnati's dropped off a bit. The key to me is the linebacker play. You look at Baltimore, and you got Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen. You look at Cleveland, and you've got Owosu Koromoa and Taki and a couple other dudes whose names I don't have committed to memory right now, but Cleveland's got some really good linebackers. I love JOK. Minnesota's got Ivan Pace Jr. I think he's undrafted, and he looks promising. And then Cincinnati, you got Jermaine Pratt and Logan Wilson. That's a really good linebacking core. Seattle gets exploited way too much at the second level with their linebackers. So especially acknowledging the possibility that Brooks might not resign either, or Seattle might not resign Brooks. If you want to get technical about it, yeah, they're going to need to invest at the linebacker position. Quarterback, it all depends on how you feel about Geno. I've been thinking it's an either or. Either you keep Geno or you draft a quarterback, especially with the fact that his cap hit's going to increase significantly starting next year if you don't cut him. But it's a 3-year deal. I am not totally against the idea of keeping Geno, knowing full well that it's going to tie up quite a bit in the cap, and they're in a cap crunch right now, and drafting a quarterback early, whether it's in the first round or whether they trade down to the second round or whether they use their 2 third-round picks and trade up into the second round, uh, and have that quarterback replace Drew Lock and be sort of the understudy, so to speak. If things go south with Geno, then it's time to see what the rookie quarterback has. And if Geno still plays at a decent level, if not a better level than what we've seen this year, then at the end of Geno's contract, you say, farewell. You've given us a hell of a 3 seasons or 4 seasons as a starter, but now we're going to pass the keys over to our young and up and coming talent. And if they draft a quarterback in the first round, you always got that 5th-year option, as opposed to drafting anybody second round or later. But still, if you draft a quarterback early and Geno's here for a maximum of 2 seasons, you still got the other half of that rookie quarterback's rookie contract to work with. So getting back to your other question about the players who are going to stay and who's going to leave, I think they're going to keep Geno. And I think this is going to be Pete's pushing. And he will attribute some of Geno's struggles to the way that the offensive line has struggled. A lot of the miscommunications we've seen between quarterback and receiver that may be attributed to the practice times and the fact that Lockett and Metcalf have been in and out of practice all season with their nagging injuries. I think Locke is going to get a chance to compete for a starting job. It might not be here. It could be on another team. Well, it has to be on another team if I don't think he's going to stay here, but you get the idea. I think Locke's going to get the chance to compete for a starting job in the free agent market, so Locke will just be on his merry way. Adams, I don't think they're going to keep. Bobby Wagner, love him. He's going to be in the Ring of Honor. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame. I don't think he'll be a Seahawk next year. Quandre, they could, in theory, end up letting him go because of the money that he's making. But if you let Bobby go, you let Quandre go. And this is nothing to do with statistics or anything like that. I feel like Diggs is a true leader on this defense. And you got such a young group out there. Who's going to be that leader on the defensive side of the ball? Because Woolen, of course, is coming off a benching, and he's only just getting his playing time again. Witherspoon, super exciting player, doesn't necessarily make him a team leader on the defensive side of the ball. You don't know what you're going to do with Brooks. Adams, of course, is staying. Maybe Julian Love can be the team leader, but I don't know enough on that front. Diggs has been an important part of Seattle's secondary and defense overall for a long time, that I think they will part ways with Adams. They'll keep Love. They'll keep Diggs. And then they'll still draft a safety. And also have Jarek Reed coming back from his injury, and we can see what happens from there. So my crystal ball as to what I think will happen is keep Geno and keep Quandre, and then we'll move on from Wagner and Adams, and Locke will sign somewhere else in free agency. I hear the Denver Broncos might have an opening. Anyway, last question here, Body by Skittles24. My question, what word would you use to describe the Seahawks season thus far, or depending on when this all goes down overall? You seem ready to be done with these guys for a 4-game stretch. While there were some big issues to work through in the offseason and beyond, I feel it really could be summarized in this statement. Growing pains. The roster is getting better, and I think will continue to get better, and hopefully we see changes in other areas that will help us take a step towards being a contender. I would describe the Seahawks season as rocky. Not Rocky Balboa, although it could be rocky in the sense that they're going to lose in the end. Spoiler alert. But rocky on multiple fronts. The rocky bits is just the performance, rocky in terms of the player-coach relationships, and just rocky from a fan perspective, because even on a quarter-to-quarter basis, they're putting us up and down, it seems like, every week. The way the season started with the defense coming out with its usual poor starts, and then next thing you know, they dominated against the Giants. They look pretty good in a losing effort against the Bengals. We've had the season-long issues on offense, but you go from going 1 touchdown and 2 combined games on offense against the 49ers or Rams to putting up 35 points against the Cowboys. And then you have the 16 points against San Francisco in the rematch, and suddenly you get 20 against Philadelphia. And he had 20 against Tennessee, but on 7 possessions. I think the offense played better than the 20 points suggested and less than 300 yards. But yeah, it's been a rocky season. And a lot of it is, I think, in part because of what happened in 2022, where the expectations were so low that Seattle wouldn't be much anything. And then they end up winning 9 games. They end up getting into the playoffs. So instead of going, all right, this is year 2 of the retooling in the post-Russell Wilson era, the Seahawks have won 5 games. Let's see if they can win 7 or 8 or be competitive and show that upward mobility. Instead, they go from 9-8 last year to it's very possible they'll go 9-8 again this year, except that 9-8 might not get you into the playoffs. Even if they go 10-7, it doesn't feel like Seattle is poised to make any sort of deep playoff run. And the fan reaction and the fan gauging and the mood in general feels a lot different for this season getting to potentially the playoffs again compared to last year because the expectations are different. The rockiness with Jamal Adams, it went from the issues with getting into it with the concussion doctor while he's concussed, and then again while he isn't concussed and he's checking on Jake Bobo. And then, of course, the yikes tweet heard around the world, and then his actual play on the field. Now we're wondering what in the world is going on with him not showing up at the Eagles game. Is he even going to play again with Seattle? All the cryptic comments, it seems like, from Pete Carroll. That bit has been rocky. Of course, DK Metcalf, he's been rocky in the sense that he has been his usual self in terms of the penalties he's committed and the pushing and shoving. I didn't really care about the 49ers thing all that much. But he's also given you tremendous play over the last few weeks in 2-minute drill situations or clutch time situations. And I think he's going to be on his way to another 1,000-yard year when it didn't look particularly likely at the halfway mark of the year. You've had the slow start with Jackson Smith and Jigba, getting all these screen passes and a couple of drops, and now suddenly he's the most important third down target on the team, you could argue, or at least right alongside Tyler Lockett. The injuries, of course, have also created some bumpiness where you don't know who's going to be in the lineup on a week-to-week basis. So yes, I could summarize this whole season as it's rocky. Doesn't mean that it's been unbearable, but I will be honest and say I haven't wholly enjoyed this season, and I don't think the Seahawks have been as exciting as they could be. You can't be bad and boring or mediocre and boring at the same time. Like these wins over the Titans and Eagles were exciting in the end, but the flow of those games are not entertaining at all. It was just blah. It was forgettable. So for the last couple of weeks of the season, I hope they can both be exciting and successful, because I think we're owed that after the way that this season has gone, with starting out at 6-3 and then dropping to 6-7, and now you're at 8-7 with a real chance of finishing on a 4-game winning streak to offset the 4-game losing streak. Let me look at the question again here. Yeah, there are some growing pains from the younger players. Certainly Witherspoon has taken his lumps. Woolen has not had as good a second season as he did in his rookie campaign. When Witherspoon plays again, which could be as soon as this weekend, I wouldn't be shocked if Kobe Bryant's snaps are back to 0 on the defensive side of the ball. Charles Cross has also had some ugly moments in his second season, but I think he's generally been about the same as his rookie year. The growing pains are expected for the younger players. It's just that the players that I think Seahawks fans are most upset with are the veterans, whether it's Metcalf or whether it's Geno or Jamal Adams or Quandre Diggs or Wagner. It's actually the veterans that I feel like the fans are paying attention to the most. And those are the ones who shouldn't be dealing with quote unquote growing pains at all. I think Seattle can be a contender again, but still a lot has to go right. And my biggest issue right now with the coaching staff is they don't particularly, that the roster itself does not seem well coached in terms of the penalties they commit, some of the coverage busts that continue to happen, some of the run defense issues that we're seeing, the pass protection bust. It doesn't feel like a cohesive unit. And time is running out for them to start playing their best football. So I wish I could share your optimism, Body by Skittles 24. As far as being a contender down the line, I think they're going to have to hit it out of the park on another draft. The 2022 draft with Mafe and Walker and Cross and so on and so forth. That may end up not being as great a draft as it seemed in the first year because of the step back that Bryant's has taken, the fact that we've had a couple of guys already gone from the team. But 2023 is already hugely encouraging. I think there's a chance that 2023 can even be better than the 2022 draft, just on Witherspoon and Smith and Jigba alone. But you're also asking a lot to have a third straight great draft in a row, or net positive draft in a row. Something that we hadn't really seen from Seattle since 2010, 11, and 12. It all depends on, at least to me, it all depends on what happens at the quarterback position, whether they find an exciting new rookie, whether Geno does have a better season to come. That to me is going to dictate whether or not the Seahawks are a true contender again, because if they don't have an elite defense in a year or two, fine. You can get by with an above average defense as long as your offense is elite. But what we've seen this year with the Seahawks is that their defense is not only not good, but the offense hasn't been great. And that is a major reason why the Seahawks are sitting here at 8-7, in control of their own playoff destiny, but also still a good distance away from the absolute elite of the NFL. So that's all to come in once we hit the offseason, which of course we hope is after the Super Bowl, and the Seahawks have got the most unlikely Lombardi trophy of all time, conquering Joe Flacco's Cleveland Browns. But in the real world, I think we should just brace for impacts as far as how this season is going to end. But there'll be a lot of opportunities to talk about Seattle's future with free agency and the draft once we hit February, March. You get the whole deal. So on that note, that is it for this final Q&A of 2023. We'll do another one probably in written form. If they make the playoffs, then we'll do one in the playoffs before the wild card game. If not, probably do one anyway after the final regular season game. So you've seen the little bar below there where you can follow me on Twitter at Mookie Alexander, Field Goals at Field Goals, and then our YouTube channel, Field Goals SB Nation. And yes, you can read all of our stuff over at fieldgoals.com, whether that's me or John Gilbert or Tyler Olsen, our entire great staff. So until next time, I think the Seahawks are going to beat the Steelers. Ideally, they beat them 21-10 just for a little Super Bowl 40 revenge. But until next time, have a happy new year and go Hawks.